7 years ago, I watched my promotion walk into the conference room, wearing a $500 tie and my work in his hands. He was already rich. Ethan drove the imported car, wore the tailored suits, had the family money and the downtown condo. I was the one quietly building the system that kept our division from bleeding cash. And somehow, when the dust settled, he got the title I'd spent 3 years earning. I'm not writing this for sympathy. I'm writing this because a lot of you will recognize pieces of this story from your own office. The golden boy who never stays late, but always seems to be there when credit is handed out. The one who presents what you built. Back then, I was 35, a senior analyst in operations at a mid-sized logistics firm. I liked the order of it. Numbers in, patterns out, processes tightened. I knew the vendor contracts better than I knew my own mortgage. My manager, Paul, called it grunt genius. Not something you put in a LinkedIn headline, but enough to make the quarterly reviews slightly less painful for the executives. Ethan joined our team after an internal reshuffle. Officially, he was brought in from strategy to add an executive lens to operations. Unofficially, everyone knew his uncle was on the board, and his mother played tennis with the CEO's wife. He didn't brag about it. People like him don't have to. He was friendly enough when he landed in the open desk across from mine. "Grant, right?" he said, dropping his laptop bag on the chair. "I've heard your name in like 3 meetings already. You're the wizard behind the variance reports." "Wizard's a stretch," I answered. "I just count better than most." For the first few months, I walked him through our reconciliation process and showed him how to read the backlog spreadsheets. He picked up enough to sound fluent to people who didn't know the work. In private, his knowledge had gaps. In public, he covered them with confidence and buzzwords. When the company announced they were creating a new role, Director of Process Optimization, it was the first time in years I had allowed myself to imagine a different title next to my name. The role sat exactly between operations and strategy. You needed to understand the dirty details of freight costs and warehouse penalties, but you also had to talk cleanly in executive slides. I wasn't flashy, but I knew the spine of our business better than anyone in the building. Paul called me into a small conference room the day the posting went up. "You're going for it," he said. "I've already told HR." "I've never managed people formally," I said, though we both knew I'd been managing half the team informally for years. "You've been doing the work," he replied. "We just haven't been paying you for the title. This is your chance to fix that." There was a pause. "Just know you're not the only internal candidate," he added carefully. "Ethan's interested too." Of course he was. I spent the next 6 weeks building the process pilot that would become the centerpiece of my application. Late nights, early mornings, weekends in the office when the motion-activated lights forgot I existed. I designed a new workflow for our West Coast shipments that would cut reroute costs by 12% without additional headcount. By the time the interviews started, the pilot had been live for 3 weeks. The numbers were real, not projections. I had graphs, exception logs, and emails from warehouse managers who finally felt like someone had untangled their month-end nightmare. Ethan, on the other hand, had something else. Time blocked on the VP's calendar for coffee chats and a way of dropping phrases like strategic alignment and cross-functional synergies that made executives nod along, even when there was nothing behind the words. The first interview round went well. Structured questions, competency grids, the usual circus. I walked out feeling like, for once, the substance might actually matter more than the show. Then came the day of the presentation. They scheduled us back to back to present our visions for the role to a small panel. I'd rehearsed my slides until I could navigate them blind. They weren't pretty, but they told the story clearly. Here are the leaks. Here's how we plug them. Here's the money we save. I was waiting outside the glass-walled conference room when I saw Ethan go in ahead of me, laptop under his arm, my pilot's dashboard open on the screen. At first, I thought I was mistaken. The graphs looked familiar, but lots of graphs do. Then I recognized the axis labels, the color coding, The small typo in exceptions by Lane I hadn't had time to fix. It was my work, dressed in his suit. Through the glass, I watched him plug in his laptop, shake hands, and start talking with that easy, confident posture. The COO leaned forward. On the screen behind him, my process diagrams filled the room. I felt my throat go dry in the hallway. Paul appeared at my side, coffee in hand, and followed my line of sight. "Is that your deck?" he asked quietly. "Most of it," I said, with better fonts. Paul swore under his breath, then forced his face neutral. "You'll get your turn, just stick to your version. Numbers don't care who reads them out loud." Maybe, but promotions often do. 40 minutes later, Ethan walked out of the room, tie straight, smile in place. "Break a leg," he said, clapping my shoulder as if he hadn't just walked off with my spine in his hands. I went in, presented the same results from the person who actually built them, and tried not to hear his voice echoing in their ears. When it was over, the panel thanked me. HR smiled the way people smile when they already know the ending. I knew, walking back to my desk past Ethan's empty chair, that something had shifted. I just didn't know yet that this was the moment he'd started a 7-year clock he would eventually beg me to turn back. If the promotion had simply gone to someone better, I could have swallowed it. People win, people lose, and life keeps its receipts in ways we don't always see. But what happened instead, that stayed under my ribs for years. A week after the interviews, HR sent a calendar invite titled Announcement, Process Optimization Director. They booked the big conference room upstairs, the one with the frosted walls and the fake plant that never collected dust, because no one got close enough to touch it. When I walked in, Ethan was already there, leaning against the credenza like a man waiting to receive an award he'd paid for. The VP, COO, HR director, all of them taking their seats with the kind of pleasant anticipation that told me decisions had been locked in days ago. Paul stood near the back, jaw tight. He wouldn't meet my eyes. The VP cleared his throat. "Before we begin, I want to recognize the exceptional work both of you presented. Truly strong candidates." I already knew what came after truly. "After careful consideration, we're pleased to offer the role of Director of Process Optimization to Ethan Caldwell." Applause, light, polite, harmless, unless you were standing in my shoes, feeling the floor shift half an inch beneath you. Ethan stepped forward with the expression of a man receiving something he believed he deserved, simply because he wanted it. "Thank you," he said smoothly. "I'm excited to operationalize the ideas we've developed." "We." That word cut deeper than the title itself. I congratulated him. I shook hands. I even smiled with the professionalism expected of someone who wasn't raised on inherited shortcuts. But when I left the room, I did it with the silence that Paul recognized instantly. He followed me into the hallway. "Grant," he said quietly, "you need to know something." I stopped, turned, waited. He checked the corridor, lowered his voice. "They think Ethan is better in rooms with executives. They think he communicates upward more naturally." "That's one way to describe rehearsed charisma," I said. He exhaled. "Look, you'd have built that pilot. Everyone knows it. But these decisions are political," I finished. His silence confirmed it. That night, I drove home without the radio on. The city lights blurred past the windshield in long streaks, and I went over everything in my head. Every late night, every missed weekend, every spreadsheet that had stolen hours from my life. All of it handed over because someone with the right last name knew how to pitch work he didn't understand. By morning, irritation had hardened into something sharper, because the announcement wasn't the end. It was the beginning. 2 weeks after Ethan took the role, he called a team meeting. I expected a broad roadmap. Instead, he clicked to a slide titled West Coast Process Redesign, Phase 1, and my stomach dropped. It was my pilot, my architecture, my logic. Even the order of bullet points was the same. But now the colors matched the company palette, and the font was the sleek kind you use when you're selling something you didn't build. "Over the next quarter," Ethan said, We'll expand this workflow into a full division-wide initiative. I waited for him to credit the person who had created that workflow. He didn't. Not once. When the meeting ended, a couple of teammates clapped him on the back. "Strong vision, man," one said. "You'll turn this division around." I didn't say a word. Not yet. But later, as the office thinned out, Paul stopped by my desk. "You all right?" he asked. "Fine," I answered. "You're not," he said, "and you shouldn't be." There was a pause, heavy, deliberate. "He's going to ride this project hard," Paul continued. "He wants numbers fast, and if something breaks, he'll blame the nearest body." He didn't have to explain who the nearest body was. "That's just the beginning," he added before walking away. And he was right, because a promotion stolen out of arrogance creates one kind of damage. A promotion managed out of incompetence creates another. The latter always comes due. The first invoice on Ethan's leadership arrived quicker than anyone expected. 3 weeks into the expansion, he sent out a directive to streamline exception approvals. In plain language, that meant skipping 2 verification steps I'd intentionally built, because without them, the system loses track of misrouted freight. I emailed him. "These checks prevent duplicate charges from vendors. Removing them will inflate cost reports." He replied with one sentence, "Let's move faster and clean later." I stared at that line long enough for the irritation in my chest to turn to heat, but I complied and logged every change, every timestamp, every email, not out of revenge, out of survival. Because when someone careless pulls the bolts from a machine, the shrapnel always hits the person standing closest. 2 days later, the West Coast report spiked with unaccounted variances. Ethan called an emergency meeting, voice tight. "We're seeing inconsistencies in the data," he announced. "Grant, walk us through what happened." There it was, the first attempt to shift blame. I opened my laptop slowly, calmly, like a person who knows exactly what's in his back pocket. And then something happened. A small moment, barely visible, but enough to shift the temperature of the room. Ethan's confident facade flickered, just for a second, just enough for me to understand something important. This wasn't a man in control. This was a man who had taken a throne built on someone else's work, and realized only after sitting down that he had no idea how to hold it. And that was only the beginning. He just didn't know yet how much it was going to cost him. It started quietly. Small mistakes, little fractures in the foundation. But fractures become patterns, and patterns eventually become the truth nobody can ignore. 3 weeks after the data inconsistencies meeting, our Monday rolled in with 2 problems waiting at the door: a vendor invoice mismatch and a routing discrepancy tied directly to Ethan's streamlined workflow. All of it was predictable. I had warned him in writing 3 times. I walked into the office early, coffee still too hot to drink, and found Ethan already in his chair. He almost never arrived before 8. Today he was here before 7. That was my first clue. He didn't look up when I passed his desk. His posture was too stiff, too controlled. "Morning," I said. He forced a smile. "Busy day ahead." That was the second clue. People who know what they're doing say busy. People who don't say it like a prayer. At 10, he called me into a side office. "Grant, I need you to handle something quietly." Quietly. The word executives use when they want you to fix a problem without leaving fingerprints. He closed the door. "So, the COO flagged the West Coast numbers. She wants a breakdown." "All right," I said. "We can walk through the pilot metrics that—" "No," he interrupted. "Not the pilot. I need you to clean the variances before she sees them." That was the moment the click happened in my mind, the one that separates irritation from clarity. "You want me to alter the variance logs?" I asked. "To avoid unnecessary panic," he said. I held his gaze. "No." He blinked. "No? I'm not modifying records. You want honest data, or you want a cover-up? You can have one." His jaw tightened. "Grant, I'm asking as your director." And I'm answering as the person who built the system, I replied. If you want clean numbers, stop breaking the checks. For a moment, the room was silent. Then he said the sentence that shifted everything. Just remember, I can affect your future here. Not a threat shouted in anger, a reminder delivered softly, a man mistaking my quiet for weakness. I stood up. And I can affect yours, I said. Not a threat, a truth. I walked out. That was the last conversation we ever had where he pretended to have the upper hand. That week became a storm. The cost overruns kicked in. Routing exceptions doubled. One of our largest vendors emailed the CFO directly asking why they were being asked to reconcile duplicate charges. The CFO summoned Ethan and me to a meeting Thursday afternoon. She wasn't harsh. She didn't need to be. She had a stillness that did the work for her. Explain, she said. Ethan launched into a polished explanation full of vague statements about process realignment and interim friction. I let him talk. When he finally paused, she turned to me. Grant? I opened my folder, yes, a real folder, and laid out every documented change Ethan had made, the directives he issued, the steps he removed, the timestamps, the warnings I sent. I didn't embellish. I didn't dramatize. I just told the truth. The CFO scanned the papers, her face unreadable. Ethan, she finally said, why did you remove the exception checks that prevented vendor discrepancies? Ethan froze for half a second. I felt they were unnecessary delays, he said. Grant over-engineered the pilot. I streamlined it. She lifted her eyes. And where is the analysis that supported that decision? He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. I didn't formalize it, he said. Her silence was the sound of a man falling through a floor he didn't know was fragile. Grant, she said, turning to me calmly, would your original workflow have prevented these discrepancies? Yes. And can you restore it? In 1 hour? She nodded. This stays between us for now, she said. Ethan, we'll discuss your decision-making separately. He swallowed. We left the room. He didn't speak to me on the walk back. His footsteps were fast. Too fast. Like he wanted to outrun the conversation that was waiting for him. That night, I stayed late and restored the system. When I finally shut down my computer, the office was dark, except for the light over Ethan's desk. He wasn't at it. But the chair was pushed back, and a printed copy of my pilot, my original pilot, sat open beside his keyboard, pages covered in frantic notes and underlines. I stared at it for a long moment, not with anger, with understanding. For the first time, I realized something important. He wasn't just arrogant. He was drowning. And the company had given him the title anyway, because sometimes promotions aren't earned, they're arranged. And sometimes the person who takes a shortcut ends up lost in a place only the person they stole from can navigate. But here's the thing. I wasn't planning to save him. Not this time. Because what broke next wasn't the system. It was him. He just didn't know yet, and neither did I, about the one decision he would make that would finally set the endgame in motion. When people fall, they usually fall in 2 stages. First quietly, inside themselves, then loudly, where everyone can hear it. Ethan's quiet fall had already begun. His loud one was about to start, and the spark wasn't mine. It came from a place he never saw coming, the quarterly business review. 2 weeks after the CFO meeting, the company prepared for the QBR, a gathering where regional heads, finance, and executives tore every department, open with spreadsheets, questions, and polite brutality. It was the one event where you couldn't hide behind buzzwords. You either had results or you had excuses. I knew the West Coast mess would surface, but I assumed the CFO would handle it privately. I underestimated her. The morning of the review, she stopped by my desk. That alone was unusual. CFOs don't walk to analyst rows unless something is breaking or something is ending. Grant, she said, bring the variance documentation to the boardroom at 2:15. Understood. She didn't explain further. CFOs rarely do. At 2:15, I entered the boardroom through the side door used by presenters. Through the glass divider, I could see all of them gathered. The COO, the CFO, the VP of Operations, the regional directors, HR Athen. He sat 2 seats from the end of the table, not quite at the kids' table, not quite among the adults. His posture was straight, hands clasped, jaw tight. I placed my binder on the console near the screen and waited. The CFO cleared her throat. Before we move to East Coast projections, we need to address the West Coast variance escalation. Ethan shifted in his chair. That was the first sign. The COO leaned in. The spike was significant. We want clarity on what caused it. The CFO turned her head slightly. Grant, walk us through the timeline. A clean invitation. Public, deliberate. I opened my binder. There was no emotion in my voice. There didn't need to be. I walked the room through. The original workflow, the protected checks, the directives Ethan issued, the warnings I documented, the resulting discrepancies, the vendor escalation, the fix. Every point was factual, time-stamped, written, verified. Every line pointed back to one source. As I spoke, the room shifted, subtly but unmistakably. The executives started checking the printouts. The COO's brow furrowed. The VP rubbed his forehead. HR scribbled something on a notepad. Ethan didn't move. He sat with the stillness of a man waiting for a punch he couldn't avoid. When I finished, the COO spoke first. Ethan, did you review or validate the impact analysis before making these workflow changes? He swallowed. I believe the adjustments were improvements. The COO's voice was cold steel. Belief is not a process. The CFO added, why were Grant's warnings ignored? Ethan looked for a lifeline that did not exist. They felt overly cautious. Caution prevents loss, she said. Recklessness created it. Silence, sharp, final. Then the VP delivered the line that ended the debate. This wasn't just poor judgment. This was negligence. No raised voices, no theatrics. Just the corporate equivalent of a death sentence. But the worst part for Ethan wasn't the criticism. It was what happened next. The COO turned back to me. Grant, we'd like you to lead a temporary task force to stabilize the division. Full authority over workflow adjustments. Direct reporting line to me and the CFO. Ethan's head jerked slightly. That was the second sign, the panic breaking through his polished composure. I kept my voice neutral. I'll take responsibility for stabilizing operations. Good, the COO said. Start immediately. Ethan looked at me then, and for the first time since the day he stole my pilot, his expression wasn't confident or charming. It was scared, because he finally understood something. He had taken the title, but he had never taken the competence. And now competence was being elevated above him, in front of everyone. After the meeting, he caught up to me near the elevator. Grant, wait. I did. He closed the distance, lowered his voice. You blindsided me. I documented everything, I replied. You chose not to read it. You could have handled this privately. You made it public when you broke the process that fed the entire division. He stared at the elevator display, jaw tight. Then he said the line that revealed the truth he'd been hiding. I'm drowning, man. For a moment, a brief one, I saw the person he was behind the arrogance, a man over his head in a job he wasn't built for. But empathy isn't obligation. I warned you, I said. 3 times. He exhaled shakily. Can you help me fix this, just until things settle? Not a command, not a demand, a plea. The first crack in his armor big enough for daylight. I'll fix the system, I said, but I'm not fixing your leadership. The elevator opened. I stepped in. He didn't follow. That night, I drove home in silence, the city blurring past the windshield. I wasn't celebrating, not even close. This wasn't revenge yet. It was something else. The moment before lightning strikes. The part where the air shifts, thick and electric. Because Ethan hadn't reached the bottom. Not yet. The moment that finally broke him and set the stage for everything that came after. was still ahead, and when it happened, it wouldn't be in a boardroom. It would be somewhere far more personal. The loud fall didn't happen at work. It happened on a Thursday night, in a place Ethan never imagined his career would collide with reality. A small neighborhood bar 2 blocks from the office. The kind with wooden booths, and a bartender who knows everyone's name by the second visit. It was late, past 10, and I was there with Paul, unwinding after another 12-hour sprint to stabilize what Ethan had broken. The day had been brutal. We'd uncovered 3 more discrepancies tied directly to his shortcuts. The CFO asked me for updated mitigation plans. The COO blocked off time on my calendar. HR sent me a request for workstream clarifications, which in corporate language means they were assembling a file. Ethan had been unusually quiet all day. Around 10:30, the bar door opened. He walked in. Not the polished director version, not the confident, well-groomed golden boy, just a man whose world had become too heavy to hold. He scanned the room, noticed us, hesitated, and then approached. Paul straightened in the booth. "Here we go." Ethan stopped at our table. "Grant, can I talk to you for a minute?" I nodded, stepped aside with him. He rubbed his hands together like he was trying to generate courage. "They're taking the role for me," he said quietly. "CFO met with me this afternoon. HR was there. It wasn't a conversation." His eyes were tired, the kind of tired that doesn't come from lack of sleep, but from lack of ground to stand on. "They're moving me back to strategy. Demotion, pay cut, no team, no leadership track for a year." A pause. "And they're giving the transition to you." There it was, the sentence 7 years in the making. I didn't smile. Victory doesn't always feel like victory. Sometimes it feels like the end of a weight you got too used to carrying. "I saw it coming," I said truthfully. He exhaled, shaky. "I didn't." He looked up at me then, and for the first time, no arrogance, no shield, no inherited confidence. Just a man who finally understood that shortcuts aren't neutral. They come with invoices, and his was due. "I messed up," he said. "Not just the workflow. I messed you up. I took something you built because I thought I could handle it. I thought if I could just get the title, I'd grow into it." He swallowed. I didn't. The bar noise faded behind us. Laughter, clinking glasses, someone playing classic rock on the jukebox. All of it blurred into background as he stood there unraveling the last piece of the image he had been clinging to. "I wanted to be the guy everyone noticed," he said. "But every time something broke, I looked at you, hoping you'd fix it." "That's not leadership," I replied. "I know." Another pause. Then us, softly, almost ashamed. "Can you help me figure out how to not screw up what's left?" Not to save his title, not to save his reputation, just to save himself from repeating the same pattern. For the first time in 7 years, his request wasn't entitlement. It was humility. I studied him for a moment. The expensive tie loosened, the confident posture gone, the look of someone who finally understood the difference between wanting responsibility and being ready to carry it. "Yeah," I said, "I can help you, but not the way you think." He frowned. "You don't need me to fix your mistakes," I continued. "You need to learn the work. All of it. From the ground up, without shortcuts, without pretending you know things you don't." He nodded slowly, absorbing it. It landed. "And Ethan," I added, "this next part is important. I'm not doing your job for you ever again." His eyes lifted, calm now. "I get that. You want to rebuild? Start by showing up differently." A long silence. "Thank you," he finally said. The tone was unfamiliar, not polished, not performative. Real. He turned to leave, then stopped. "One more thing," he said quietly. "The promotion 7 years ago, you should have gotten it. I know that now." I didn't answer immediately, because sometimes the truth doesn't need confirmation. It just needs to be spoken by the person who denied it. I nodded once. "I know." He left the bar with a weight lifted that didn't belong to me. Paul returned with 2 new drinks. So? It's done, I said. He raised a brow. Done like revenge done, or done like peace done? Both, I answered. The next months moved fast. The task force stabilized the division. The variance trend line flattened. The CFO gave me full autonomy over operations redesign. Ethan quietly took his demotion and began actually learning, asking questions, taking notes, doing the work he used to fake. He didn't become my friend, but he did become someone who finally understood the value of what he had tried to steal. And the company, they didn't hand me Ethan's title. They handed me something more important, a role built around the work I had been doing quietly for years. Director of Operational Risk and Process Integrity. Not the role stolen from me, a role built for me, the one that finally fit. 7 years earlier, Ethan stole my promotion. 7 years later, he gave me something else. Without meaning to. Closure. Not the dramatic kind, not the triumphant kind, the quiet kind. The kind that feels like the end of a chapter you didn't know how to close on your own. Because real revenge isn't humiliation, it isn't spectacle. It's going home at the end of a long day, turning off your computer, and realizing the one person who underestimated you the most finally sees you clearly. And you no longer need anything from them. Not credit, not apology, not recognition, not validation, nothing. Your life is already bigger than the thing they took. Peace isn't dramatic. It's just finally being done with the weight someone else left on your shoulders. And I was done.